I'm David Lombardo, and this is WCNY's The Capitol Press Room. We're joined in the studio by Assembly Minority Leader Ed Rah, a Nassau County Republican who's here to talk about the past legislative session in Albany, as well as his effort to grow his conference as part of this fall's elections. Welcome back to the show, Leader Rah.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Well, for starters, were there any surprises from your first 6 months as leader of the Assembly Republicans? Maybe something that was easier or harder than you expected, or maybe there was some task that Leader Barclay didn't appropriately brief you on?
Well, as you would imagine, having a conference of 47 members means 47 different personalities.
Sure.
With different interests in their districts, things that they're interested in working on. So just, the volume of all of that and, in trying to move that through the end of a legislative session, dealing with a budget, dealing with, local bills, all that type of stuff that you want to get done before we left here for the summer.
Was it difficult during budget negotiations, given your experience as the top Republican on the Ways and Means Committee, to not run to the floor during budget debate? Was it awkward at all as you had to sit in your office during those floor conversations?
It was weird. I will start by saying Mr. Palmisano did a tremendous job, but the last 6 budgets prior to that were the ones that I were debating. So
none as late as this one.
Yes, true. I know. I told both Mr. Palmisano and Mr. Pretlow they got to get their act together and get this done a little earlier next year. But yeah, it was different. You're not as focused on what questions you need to raise on the floor and all that type of stuff. It's more big picture. It's more what members of ours are talking about, what issues on different bills and stuff. So it was a little strange, basically watching on a television screen in my office, the budget being debated as it came together.
And in terms of putting your own stamp on things like an office, do you have all of the Barclay paraphernalia out and the new Ed Rah, Islanders merchandise in there? I mean, is the space your own here in Albany?
It is. We are fully moved into both the LOB and Capitol offices. Have my different touches of decor. We rearranged the furniture up in the LOB office, to make it a little different, just to have a new feel.
Well, thinking about the legislative session, are there any Democratic policies you feel like your party had a hand in shaping this year, either in terms of the budget or standalone legislation, that you feel like were influenced by the persuasive techniques of the Assembly Republicans?
Well, there was a lot of stuff that we have been talking about, certainly on the energy issues. We were talking about that early in the year, talking about rollbacks with regard to the CLCPA, the rebate on energy, for ratepayers that we had proposed as part of our lower plan back in February. That was in the final budget. There were some initiatives with regard to education. UPK is something we've been talking about, the funding side of, in particular for, places like Long Island, where it just, the funding the state was giving was not enough for a lot of districts to get programs up and running. So there were a number of things that we think, tipped wages, another one. So we feel like we did have some wins within this budget and legislative session.
Delaying the implementation of zero-emission school bus mandates?
Yes, absolutely. One we've been talking about for many years. That was a big one that I think had really just reached a tipping point where it was what everybody was hearing from local school board members and superintendents. I will tell you, when I was meeting with school boards and superintendents that, it's budget time. Usually they're saying, hey, can you get us more school aid? When the first topic of conversation with them was, you guys got to do something with this mandate. It's not feasible for us. I think that got a lot of attention on both sides of the aisle in both houses.
Well, I'm glad you bring up the idea of a tipping point, because I think when it comes to the Republican power here in Albany, it is that idea that you can influence the narrative, so to speak. And you can't do that overnight. It comes with a prolonged pressure campaign, and you have to reach that tipping point. So as you think about, say, 2027 and what you want to be talking about and what you want to have on the agenda, are there things that are coming to mind right now that you're looking to build up some steam right now?
Definitely. I mean, Look, number one, we're hoping to have a larger conference when we come back here in January, and hopefully break that supermajority number, which would be, I think, very helpful in providing a little more balance within the chamber. But, we are going to always be talking about, affordability. And one of the things that's going on right now, right, is both parties are talking affordability. We're talking about it in terms of, hey, we got to, lower taxes, we got to lower regulations, we got to be more friendly for business. A lot of times, the affordability initiatives that I think are coming from the other side are about spending more at a state level, and we don't think that's the long-term key to affordability. So, we have plans. With regard to energy, I mentioned the rebates, but there are other things that we would like to see done that we're going to continue to push for, especially on creating power generation. I think that's, where a big part of our problem is right now. We have huge demand by electrification of different things, and we don't have the supply to meet that demand, and prices are going up. So I think that's something that we need to continue to work on.
On that front, is there any sort of feelings one way or another about the interest that utilities have expressed in generating their own power, something that they have restrictions on doing right now?
It's an issue I've been following in terms of just talking about from the producer side, from the utility side. I think that, we have a system where utilities, are buying power from different operators who are producing power. I don't want to say, I'm dead set one way or another, but I do think that our problem has been not allowing the production more so than who is able to do the production. I think we need to have the policies in place that allow more energy production. Obviously, we've talked about, on the bigger scale, nuclear, upstate, but we know those are long-term goals. Tens of billions of dollars involved, years and years to actually get that up and running. How do we continue to do that, all of the above energy, so that we have adequate supply, so that we can bring costs down, and we cannot be, we've really seen it on both ends this year, right? We had the very cold winter, huge costs to ratepayers. And then as we've gotten in the summer, real concerns about brownouts and blackouts with the heat. So, we really need to increase our supply so that we can bring the costs down and make sure that it is adequate to meet the needs of New York.
Well, before we move on, let me reintroduce you. For listeners just joining us, I'm David Lombardo, and this is WCNY's The Capitol Press Room, and we're speaking with Assembly Minority Leader Ed Rah, a Nassau County Republican. So you made a reference to growing the Assembly Republican Conference, but given the historical trends we see of midterm elections and the challenges for parties in control of the White House, like the Republican Party right now, can you really play offense here in New York, or is 2026 mostly about playing defense in Republican seats that you might have picked up in recent years?
I think it depends a lot on the seat. Okay. We have some seats that are currently Democratic held that the incumbent is retiring, that have been close races in prior cycles, that we have a lot of hope that we can play in heavily and have an opportunity to flip our way.
What are you thinking about?
Certainly the Utica seat, the Binghamton seat, so there's the Button and the Pardo seats. I think we have great candidates that really, reflect the electorate in those particular districts, have good backgrounds, are working hard. So, we're going to pay attention to those. We have other ones in different parts of the state where we have pretty strong challengers. Look, I'm not naive to the fact that it is a midterm with a Republican president, which, history tells you, the wind's more in our face than at our back. But, look, 2018, as bad a year as that was, our conference actually netted a +1 seats. So, it really does depend on a seat-by-seat basis, what the actual landscape is. And I do think there are some things that are playing in our favor in terms of, look, this state has been entirely run by Democrats for the last 8 years. So I understand. So there's kind of like, a weird dynamic there with the voter that I think a lot of people are going to want to say, okay, well, the federal government is entirely Republican. It's their fault that X, Y, and Z is happening. We're saying the state is entirely run by Democrats. It's their fault that X, Y, and Z are happening. I think the question is, how do the voters view the things that are impacting their lives on a day-to-day basis? I think, when I talk about energy, when I talk about taxes in New York State, our business climate, those are things that I think have been impacted by the Democrat control of New York State.
One of the big issues that the governor acted on this summer unilaterally is this moratorium on the permitting of data centers. And while it remains to be seen whether she signs the bill that would codify that with some additional contingencies as well, I'm curious what you think about this approach, because from one perspective, this could be seen as anti-business because you are stopping these developments, but there is a lot of groundswell of support for this type of hold in upstate communities. So how are you processing this from a policy perspective as well as a messaging perspective? Because the governor and Democrats around New York are clearly going to be pushing this as a positive.
Yeah. So, it's an interesting, Sarah, and one of the things that I haven't really heard talked about too much is, you look at why did the governor do this moratorium by executive order? I think there's a couple of reasons. Number one, obviously, is political. She saw a benefit politically for her doing it. But also, there's a legislative one. She wasn't entirely happy with the bill, and our process here is, we're out of here in June, and now we're not back till January. So she's not going to negotiate a chapter amendment now that is going to have any impact. So she's going to probably wait till the end of the year. And I fully expect what's going to happen, later on in the year is she's going to talk about putting some of the pieces that are in her executive order into the statute, talk to the sponsors and say, hey, I'm going to sign it if you do this. I think that's unfortunate in a number of ways because maybe those conversations could have happened during the legislative session with a little more transparency as to where we were going with regard to that issue. But I think at the end of the day, we have to allow local governments to make those decisions. There are opportunities that some local governments are looking to take advantage of with having, building data centers within their jurisdiction. And, we're putting a halt to that happening now for a year. And that's a concern in a state that is already very bad for business. So I disagree with the governor's approach to it. I do hope that 1 year actually means 1 year. And this isn't one of those things because I can certainly see it coming a mile away from the legislative side that all of a sudden we'd come back towards the end of session next year and say, oh, we got to kick this out another year. So I hope that 1 year really means 1 year, and this is not another one of those temporary things that becomes a de facto permanent ban going forward, because there are a lot of issues to figure out. The energy issue, water usage, all that type of stuff. But the flip side is the demand is there for data centers and what they provide. And obviously, the demand is there for that economic development in parts of our state that have the land that they can host a data center.
Well, we've been speaking with Assembly Minority Leader Ed Rah. He is a Nassau County Republican. Leader, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.
Support for the Capitol Press Room comes from O'Donnell & Associates, a public affairs firm providing strategic guidance to businesses and nonprofits on navigating policy and regulatory issues. More information is available at o'donnellsolutions.com.